Uh, Thank you, Prabhuji, for giving me this opportunity. Indeed, it's an honor to be able to introduce the next two speakers. Of course, I don't think anybody here or anybody who knows TIFR needs an introduction to both of them. Professor M.S. Raghunathan, if you know maths, you know Professor M.S. Raghunathan in TIFR. So, Padma Professor M.S. Raghunathan is an FRS. He's a well-known mathematician. He's currently the head of National Center on Mathematics in IIT Mumbai. Was formerly the professor of eminence at TIFR and Honorable Chair. He's a recipient of all the kinds of awards you can think of, all the elite societies of academic societies of the world, whether it is Royal Society or Academy of Sciences, American Mathematical Society, and he's also the jury member for the Infosys Science Prize. I welcome Professor M.S. Raghunathan to give his account about the maths department. School, sorry.
I'm teaching at CABS, and the last 5 years I've been with them. And for the first time in my life, I've been teaching undergraduates. Well, the title of my talk is The School of Mathematics at TIFR, Some Highlights. Well, actually, I want to talk about some highest lights, I must say, because there are lots of highlights which I would like to talk about, but 40 minutes is too short a time. But then I probably can claim some privilege because of my age. I'm 9 years older than Spenta Vadia, so I should get 9 minutes more than what I got. Okay, so let me begin. I want to say a few more things about my talk. It's entitled, as I said, Some Highlights, but that means automatically some other highlights will be left out. In the 40 minutes time, I cannot say that. And I must apologize to those people who are responsible for those highlights for omitting them. And at my age, I'm afraid nostalgia will prevail over other considerations. So I will probably talk much more about the early days, my early days at TIFR than later period. Secondly, I cannot say that I've kept up as avidly as I used to with the developments of the school in this century. So my talk will largely talk about things before 2008. So I'll be largely speaking about the first 50 years of TIFR. Of course, there are some 15 years, no, not 15, how many years? Yeah, 15 years before. The TIFR had been in existence 15 years before, but I talk say something about that. And I think in some sense, that's probably the most interesting part because many people will not know about those years. For me itself, it's not direct knowledge, but hearsay. Thirdly, the constraint imposed inevitably means something does not get mentioned anyway. Homi Baba from the very beginning wanted mathematics to be a part of TIFR's activities. I think the slide shown by Grover, he had a letter from Hill or somebody telling him that mathematics should be part of the institute, right? Dirac, okay. Dirac, of course, was half mathematician. I mean, though mathematicians had a lot of trouble fixing up his ideas to fit into rigorous mathematics. You know, the Dirac function, which is zero everywhere but infinity at one point, and so the integral is one, was something which mathematicians couldn't live with. They finally found a way of getting around it, but that's another story. Okay. As early as 1946, he inducted the mathematician D.D. Kosambi, then working at Ferguson College, Pune. And the second mathematician who he inducted was this man, F.W. Levy. He was a group theorist. He had fled Nazi Germany in 1935 and taken up a professorship at Calcutta University. Jawaharlal Nehru kind of extended an open invitation to Jewish intellectuals who wanted to come to India, and he is one of the few who accepted the invitation and came to India and joined Calcutta University in 1935. So he had been already in India for more than 10 years when Baba brought him to Bombay. Both Kosambi and Levy were good mathematicians, arguably among the best working in India at that time. There were a few working outside India, Indians who probably were of higher caliber, but not very much. Kosambi served on the committee to select the Fields medalists in the year 1950. This is something which not many people know. That if you like, is the start of a association with an international body by an Indian mathematician. Begins the engagement of TIFR mathematicians with the International Mathematical Union. Ever since, someone or other, for instance, has been some member of the School of Mathematics has been a member of the Executive Committee of the International Mathematical Union. The premier international body engaged in the promotion of mathematics. That involvement continues to this day. I think right now, a member of the executive committee is an alumnus of TIFR, Ram Das. However, barring that foray of Kosambi's into international arena, mathematical activity at TIFR until 1950 was confined to the two mathematicians pursuing their own researches. They didn't even seem to have had students at that point. This was to change in the early 50s. K. Chandrasekharan, then not at 30, joined TIFR as a reader at Baba's invitation in 1949. There is a story, obviously, it's the second and third and fourth hand story, I do not know what, but it sounds very authentic about Baba's meeting with Chandrasekharan. Baba met Chandrasekharan at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, where he was assistant to Hermann Weyl, the great mathematician physicist. And at that time, he offered the job to Chandrasekharan, and Chandrasekharan, after a little thought, apparently accepted. And the story is, one day he was taking a walk with the great John von Neumann, and ahead of them, Baba was walking with Einstein and Yukawa. And von Neumann turned to Chandrasekharan and asked him, "I believe this man has offered you a job in Bombay. Are you going to take it?" And Chandrasekharan said, "Yes, more or less, I've decided." And then Baba told him, "That man is as good a physicist as me, but don't let him intimidate you. Stand him up. Stand up to him." This is the advice von Neumann gave to the Casey. And if anyone stood up to Baba at the Tata Institute, it was Chandrasekharan. They had apparently they had their differences, which is why he left in 1965. But they would also had great mutual regard. For example, most of you know that the mural painted by Hussain was decided on after a competition among many Bombay artists. And there was a committee to select the various entries submitted by the artists. Chandrasekharan was the only person from the Tata Institute, member of the Tata Institute, who was on that committee. Along with Baba was the chair, and he was on that committee. All the others were related to art in some way. But Chandrasekharan was on the committee. So apparently Baba had great regard for him, even as a non-mathematician, if you like. Actually, Baba inducted him into the Scientific Advisory Committee to the cabinet of those days. He was the chair. Nehru had made him chair, and he brought Chandrasekharan in. And Chandrasekharan, I'm told that Chandrasekharan actually was the person who drafted the science policy resolution of the government of India. Sorry? Okay. Yeah. Chandrasekharan joined TIFR in 1949. I think you mentioned that he had been made the offer in 1947, but he could join only in 1949. But that's a picture of Chandrasekharan. He also appears in some photographs which are displayed just now. So, and he was primarily, I must say, he was primarily responsible for making the School of Mathematics an internationally renowned center. When he joined, there were two others, namely Levy and Kosambi. Neither of them really thought in terms of having students or building groups, but Chandrasekharan thought of that, and he set about doing whatever is necessary for that. Commemorate is the village or something from which he comes. It's a village near a small town called Bapatla in Andhra Pradesh. That's where he was born and grew up, and then graduated from the University of Madras. He was a student of K. Anand Rao, a renowned mathematics professor at Presidency College, Madras. After his degree, he took up a temporary job as a lecturer at Presidency College. During that time, he met Marshall Stone, a leading American mathematician. Stone had acquired an interest in Carnatic music, which made him come visit Madras frequently. And on one of those visits, he met Chandrasekharan. Stone was impressed by the young man and arranged for him to visit the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton as assistant to Hermann Weyl. Stone has done a lot of these things to Indian mathematicians. Chandrasekharan is not the only one who went to Princeton because of him. There were 3 or 4 others who have done that, who did that because of him. It is at that institute that Homi Bhabha, out on a recruiting spree, met Chandrasekharan. That's wrong. 1947, I stand corrected, and made his offer. The first important initiative that KC, as Chandrasekharan came to be known, was the starting of what was essentially a graduate school in mathematics at TIFR, but it was not a formal structure. But it functioned very much like a usual graduate school in an American university. I think it was, in some sense, better structured than the physics school, than the graduate school in physics. Graduate school in physics got somewhat later a more firm structure, but here Chandrasekharan started the graduate school and started lectures, graduate lectures at the graduate level right from the beginning. The beginning is probably 52 or maybe even 51. I don't remember exactly. I mean, I've not checked exactly when the graduate school started, but with just these 3 people, it's not clear how to. There's one more person who joined, Bala Gangadharan, who was a lecturer in Pune. He came to Bombay as well. But with these 4 people, it's not clear that they could run a proper graduate school. Only 4 people, of whom 2 of them were not really involved. Levy and Kosambi did not take great interest. Levy, in fact, returned to Germany in 1950, quit in 1950. So what Chandrasekharan did was start a graduate school. Students were recruited as research assistants. That's also the case in physics. But in physics, people went through what was called the training school of the Department of Atomic Energy. In mathematics, they came directly to Tata Institute. And there was a regular pay scale, not like the graduate students today. There was a regular pay scale. And that was, in some sense, helpful. It gave you a feeling of belonging to the institution, which graduate students may not feel. Nowadays. For a period of 5 years, of which the first year was the probationary period with salaries on a pay scale, the recruits being entitled to even provident fund with the institute contributing. All that was, so it looked like you were in a regular job for most people who joined it. This was the Tata Institute continued this practice right up to, the School of Mathematics continued this practice right up to 1984, whereas the School of Physics had given it up much earlier. This was very similar to what was happening in physics, except that the physics students spent the first year at the Atomic Energy Training School in Trombay. Now, A few years after joining this institute, Casey got a colleague from his Madras days to join TIFR. The colleague KG Ramanathan was of great help to him in running the graduate school. Levy left TIFR in 1950. Another mathematician, Balangadran, joined the institute soon after that. With only 4 people, it was difficult to organize courses for the graduate school, which Casey envisaged as covering a wide spectrum of areas. He wanted graduate students to be exposed to a wide spectrum of areas, which is what would happen in a good American university. His own expertise was in classical analysis, as was that of Balangadran, while Ramanathan was a number theorist, which is also of a classical kind. With Kosambi, a third area, differential geometry, could be covered. At that point of time, Kosambi was doing some differential geometry. That is KG Ramanathan. Chandrasekharan was a first-rate mathematician, but not acquainted with the then recent exciting developments in depth. However, he knew what was really interesting, what was going on. He may not know things in depth, but he had a very good idea, a broad idea of what is happening and what is interesting, that kind of thing. He had good instinct for that. Ramanathan had a somewhat better understanding of some of this. Nevertheless, that the students get good exposure on a wide front with the areas where big advances were being made was one of Chandrasekharan's objectives. Chandrasekharan hit upon a plan to achieve this, get visitors from abroad to give advanced courses which the local faculty was unable to handle. It was here that his extraordinary abilities came to the fore. Even while his expertise was limited to classical analysis and number theory, he had a broad idea of what was happening in diverse mathematical areas, and he was an excellent judge as to what students should need to be exposed to. It's an amazing ability, you can be a very good mathematician, but this kind of perspective on what is the right thing for development and so on is a remarkable thing, ability which he had. During the 2 years he spent in Princeton, he had made friends with many leading mathematicians in the West and was on first name terms with people like Hermann Weyl. He persuaded many of them to visit Bombay to lecture to his carefully assembled students. He managed to get some of the greats of the 20th century to visit Bombay for extended periods of lecture courses. In fact, every visiting professor he got here was of a very high stature. Some of them had already high stature, but there were other younger people who became great people later. At that time, thanks to his network, he knew from his friends like Hermann Weyl who the younger generation are going to blossom into great mathematicians. And many of them, long before they became well known, were invited to Tata Institute to give lectures to the graduate students. And coming to Bombay at that time, only with leaving behind your colleagues with whom you are doing exciting research, coming here and spending 3-4 months was not something which one could easily be persuaded to do. But this man had the ability to do that. And 2 of the distinguished visitors were to influence profoundly the course of mathematics took at TIFR. C.L. Ziegel from Göttingen, one of the greatest mathematicians of the 20th century, and the distinguished fields medalist Laurent Schwartz from Paris spent extended periods of time several times. Each visit would be 3 months long, and they came something like 4 or 5 times to visit Bombay to give graduate courses. It's a great service they did to us, to this institution. And the point is that Chandrasekharan could persuade them to come, and they would come again and again because they found the students extraordinarily good. That was another thing which Casey managed. He got hold of really good students from all over the country. Actually, at that time, he did advertise all over the country, but most of the people came from Madras, the south, anyway, Tamil Nadu, Kerala, that kind of Karnataka area. So those are the photographs of Ziegel and Schwartz. Ziegel was a interesting man, very formal, always dressed This, both of them are in jacket and tie, but you can't find Ziegel without that dress. I mean, with the formal, always in a suit. And when he lectured, he would not brook any interruption. You can ask questions at the end of the lecture, but not in between. That's the kind of. Schwartz was much more informal. I mean, he was in this picture, of course, he's also in a suit, but he was very informal. And he talked to students freely. Ziegel, you have to make an appointment to see and talk to him. But Schwartz was very different. Even as the graduate school started functioning, Casey made a reluctant Baba to create a separate school of mathematics with practical total autonomy. At that time, everybody was a professor in the common faculty of TIFR. That's how things were. After he joined, this man thought what was happening at the Institute for Advanced Study should be brought here. And there were two schools, School of Physics and School of Mathematics, and he wanted the same thing here. So apparently Baba was initially reluctant, but he yielded to pressure. I mean, they had a complicated relationship. It was they respected each other. At the same time, they had strong differences of opinion. From then on, there were two faculties, and joint meetings were rare. In fact, Chandrasekhar probably deliberately avoided joint meetings because he wanted to preserve his autonomy. That's the way. Baba was a person who could, had a dominating personality. So it's not surprising that, and he was living up to his promise to Panama. The mathematics faculty in the 50s consisted of just two people. I mean, not, it should be three. I mean, Kosambi, Ramanathan, and Chandrasekhar. In those days, and right down to the 80s, only associate professors and higher ranks were called faculty members. The people like readers were not considered faculty members, but there could be faculty members at the wish of the director. If the director wanted somebody to appoint a faculty member, that could be done. That was done. The students were recruited with great care. The research assistant posts were advertised nationally, and the applications scrutinized to shortlist some 50 people. These interviews would last, I suppose it was similar in physics, these interviews would often last for 45 minutes, 1 hour, and things of that kind. It's the kind of, but the questions are all purely science, mathematics, nothing outside. My own experience of that is mixed because I thought I was answering badly, which is apparently not true because I was eventually selected. But I like the questions because they were clearly trying to examine whether I understood things properly. That's the kind of questions they were asked. So on the one hand, I enjoyed the interview, and on the other hand, I was feeling not so good because I was not answering properly. I mean, apparently, from my experience was that eventually what I learned is that they would question me, I'll give a wrong answer, and then they would point out why the answer is wrong, then I'll correct myself. It will go on like that. So that is what they wanted to see. They wanted to see if I could think on the spot and get to the correct thing, even if I make an initial mistake. Apparently, that's what they were trying to do, and that's what they did in all interviews. And when eventually I was on those interview committees, I had learned what to do from that. Anyway. And these, some 50 were called to Bombay to be interviewed by a small committee. The interview was designed not so much to test the extent of mathematical knowledge as to find out if the student had understood the mathematics she or he had been taught and had the ability to think. Often a visiting professor served on the committee. If there was some professor visiting at the time of the interviews, they would induct him into the committee. The recruitment process proved very successful and continues in the same way till today. There are many things which Chandrasekhar started, which is still being followed by the School of Mathematics. The students started producing research work from the mid-50s. Graduate schools probably started in 51 and 52. From the mid-50s, students produced research work. Of course, Chandrasekhar and Ramanathan were active in their respective fields, but the first research work produced by the students were not in their fields. they have branched out already at that time. T.P. Srinivasan, who joined the TIFR during this time, I don't remember the exact date when he joined. He came up with a theorem which the great phenomenon had said was unlikely to be true. So that made a splash, obviously. I mean, but then it turned out that phenomenon had made many brash statements of that kind. But anyway, this certainly, somebody says the phenomenon is wrong, is certainly a big achievement for a fledgling institute like Tata Institute. The first piece of work breaking away from classical areas was a paper by B.V. Singhbal entitled Algebraic Basis of Morse Theory. Singhbal was a very bright man, but unfortunately, in later years, he was not living up to his abilities properly. In fact, he never got a degree. This paper would have been quite adequate for a degree, but the man won't write it up. You get all kinds of characters in science, as you know, and this is these were. But I must consider both these as landmarks. The work of T.P. Srinivasan and the work of Singhbal. Though they are, I mean, over time, you cannot say they stood this test of time, but they were at that time certainly works of importance. Well, in general, in mathematics, there is no obsolescence. A theorem, once it's there, it's always there. A theory in physics can get blown off at some point. But nevertheless, some theorems keep being used later and then they have a much greater life. And also sometimes a theorem which has been ignored for ages suddenly becomes important because somebody has used it in a very clever way. That kind of thing happens in mathematics. So it's still possible that the work of Srinivasan and Singhbal may have repercussions in the future. One cannot say. But they are certainly good pieces of work at that time and involved clear good intellectual effort. 1953 must be considered a landmark year in the history of the School of Mathematics. That was the year when two of India's greatest mathematicians of the post-Ramanujan era joined the Tata Institute as students, joined the graduate school, M.S. Narasimhan and C.S. Seshadri. 1953 is the year they joined. By the mid-60s, they became world leaders in the area of what are called modular vector bundles. One problem with mathematics is that you cannot tell anybody outside mathematics what that means. I cannot say what modular vector bundles means. It's even some physicists, I may manage to convey something, theoretical physics, but unfortunately I cannot do anything. I just have to tell you, modular vector bundles was a very active area in mathematics at that time. And these two guys came up with a brilliant theorem which contributed immensely to making TIFR an internationally renowned center. That is some joint work by Narasimhan and Seshadri. Seshadri continued to work in that area, in the broader area of algebraic geometry, which went beyond moduli. Narasimhan has dabbled in several different things. It's a remarkable mind because in every one of those things, he came up with proving long-standing conjectures, which other people were struggling for a long time. This man enters the field, picks up whatever is necessary in no time, and then proves a theorem. That is Narasimhan's forte. And he has proved several theorems like that. I will mention some of them later. The brilliant work, well, I don't know if it's going to make sense to anybody except some mathematics people. Their brilliant work gave a transcendental characterization of stable bundles on a compact Riemann surface, which is an algebro-geometric concept. It's a purely geometric, it's essentially an algebraic concept, vector bundle, a stable vector bundle, but they managed to give it by transcendental, I mean by using methods of analysis rather than algebra. The stable bundles have been defined purely algebraically by a mathematician named Mumford, and these people came up with showing that what he defined is the same thing as something which is which can be defined through analytic means. Never mind, obviously it's hopeless trying to explain what that means. I will not say more about it. Narasimhan and Seshadri had earlier, by 1959, done work of some high quality. which had nothing to do with the later work on vector bundles. Seshadri made the first dent in what is known as Serre's conjecture on projective modules. Again, a string of words. I'm afraid jargon is inevitable when you talk mathematics. Therefore, it's difficult to convey to lay people. There are occasionally some things which you can say, something which become intelligible to lay people, like Fermat's last theorem, but that is rare. Unfortunately, so there is one piece of work from the Tata Institute where this will work, but other pieces of work I simply have to use words and tell you it's great, and you have to believe me. That's all. So Seshadri made the first dent in Serre's conjecture on projective modules, making him instantly famous. Narasimhan proved a regularity theorem for elliptic equations, which made him known internationally. Once again, these are two very different things. One is a problem in algebra, the other is a problem in analysis. And these two guys were working on different things at the time in 59. In 62, they came together to prove their joint theorem. Narasimhan, as you see, passed away 2 years ago, and Seshadri 3 years ago. They were together in college, the classmates in college, and came to Tata Institute the same year. And their career progression was entirely similar. At every stage, they were promoted at the same time, etc., etc. And some are.
32, 21 and 32.
Sorry?
The same period.
Age. No. Seshadri was born on February 28th, a leap year. And Narasimhan was born in June. So there was a few months difference, 4 months difference, but the date looks like a year gap. But, well, these are more interesting things than what I can say about mathematics, but which of course is going to mean I'm going to overstep my time limit. So, but the high point of 1959 was very with two results. That honor should go to some work by Raghavan Narasimhan, who was 22 at that time and had joined the institute in 1957. So 4 years after Seshadri and Narasimhan. This is another Narasimhan. His name is, one always used Raghavan Narasimhan because if you use the initial R Narasimhan, there's another R Narasimhan in the institute, who people know better, of course. He cracked a 50-year-old problem. A conjecture made 50 years before, or maybe even more, about Riemann surfaces. He proved that an open Riemann surface admits a proper embedding in C3, proper complex analytic embedding in C3. Well, once again, I have to throw up my hands if you ask me to explain all that. But that was a theorem which lots of people working in the forefront of complex analysis were looking for. And this guy comes in at 22. The previous year, he had a course on several complex variables, and then proves the theorem. And in that course, the lecturer, mathematician by name Organised, has mentioned that as an open problem. And 6 months later, the guy has the proof of the conjecture. Of course, it made a big splash with the question. And that meant instant celebrity and got him the prestigious invitation to an address at the International Congress of Mathematicians. The International Congress of Mathematicians is something which meets every 4 years. And they have some lectures called plenary lectures, about 20 of them, and about 100 lectures which are called sectional. That is, each it's divided into number of subjects, and each subject they invite some people. What Raghavan Narasimhan gave was a sectional lecture in several complex variables, which is the subject of his specialization. He followed that big achievement with a series of path-breaking papers to become a leader in the field of several complex variables. If you name the top half a dozen people at that period who worked in several complex variables, his name will certainly figure. And similarly, Narasimhan and Seshadri in the mid-60s, among the people in algebraic geometry, name about a top dozen, they would figure that. That's the kind of stature they had. That's the kind of value their work brought them. Raghavan Narasimhan was also from Laila College. Laila College seems to have supplied a large number of brilliant students to Tata Institute. And it's not surprising because it had an outstanding mathematician. I mean, in colleges, you don't find the real research mathematicians, but Laila College had a research mathematician, a Frenchman by name Father Racine. He was a Jesuit, and he was sent out of, he was in fact, had a doctorate in mathematics. He was sent out to teach by the Catholic mission. And after spending some years in Palayam Kottai in Tamil Nadu, he came to Laila College. And that was a great piece of luck for many students in Madras. So they learned really interesting mathematics because of man outside the syllabus, strictly outside the syllabus. So, and that's how both Narasimhan and Seshadri benefited by the presence of Racine, and so did Narasimhan, and so did C.P. Ramanujan. Ramanujan and Raghavan Narasimhan were classmates. And apparently these guys used to talk a lot of mathematics, which had nothing to do with what was going on in the class. And they had learned a tremendous amount of mathematics. When I joined the Tata Institute in 60, 3 years after these people did, everybody was of course talking about these two guys and how they knew a hell of a lot of mathematics. They were at once intimidating and at the same time also a source of inspiration. Because if one thought, okay, these guys have learned, maybe I can also do that. On the other hand, my God, when will I get there? Kind of feeling. It's a mixture. It's sometimes when you are in cheerful mood, you thought maybe I can do it. At other times, you felt depressed. Ramanujan too rose to great heights. His thesis was a splendid work on cubic forms, settling an old question. This has been the strength. Every time I talk about one of their works, you will see that they were solved a long-standing problem, which in itself tells you that it's a good piece of work without any further thing. Something which is 20 years old, 15 years old, if you have solved such a problem, it's clearly, and that is Raghavan Narasimhan and C.P. Ramanujan. And they were very different. Raghavan Narasimhan was somewhat flamboyant. He was completely extrovert. Ramanujan was the very opposite. He was introverted. In fact, the man had serious problems. He was schizophrenic and eventually committed suicide. You can see he died young, 36 years old. I know, both people were modest in one sense. That is, they certainly, like, you read Newton talking about himself. He says, I don't know what I appeared to the other world outside, but I was like small boy and so on. Of course, that was somewhat disingenuous because Newton certainly knew that he was considered a great man by all of Europe. But the second part, when he says that he is like a boy and so on, when the whole ocean of truth lies before me, that is modesty, all right. That is modesty before science. And both these people had that modesty, even though this guy was flamboyant and that guy was not. And Ramanujan, everybody would think was modest in the usual way. He wasn't. He was unhappy that he was not Hilbert. That was he said, what have I done kind of thing you would say, but that meant I'm not Hilbert. That's what it meant. But the kind of talent he had every reason to hope to become Hilbert. I mean, that he was that kind of mind. It's a fantastic mind. Well, there's one problem which, his thesis was a splendid work on cubic forms, settling an old question, but the pride of place among his works goes to work related to what is known as the varying problem. Here I can say something which anybody can understand. So I will do that about the varying problem. The varying problem was the following. I mean, David Hilbert solved the varying problem. And the solution was this: fix an integer q. Then there's another integer gq greater than 0, such that every positive integer is a sum of gq qth powers. This was proved when q is 2. That is, Lagrange long ago proved that every whole number can be written as sum of 4 squares. And this is a natural question generalizing it. can you write anything as sum of cube powers, but with a fixed number of cube powers. You shouldn't, I mean, if you want, if you allow any number, anything can be 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1, it's a cube power. Everyone is a cube power. So that's not the point. You have to restrict the number of cube powers you want to do. Hilbert proved this outstanding theorem, the solution of the varying problem. Ramanujan proved that there is an integer G capital Q such that any integer in any number field. What's a number field? I can say something about number field. Number field, you start Q is a Q is a number field. Rationals is a number field. And then you look at numbers like A plus IB. I is the square root of -1. A and B rationals. That's a number field. Or take A plus root 2 times B, A and B rational. Root 2 is not rational, so it doesn't belong there. Such numbers, such a collection of numbers is called number field. And the theorem that Ramanujan proved that there's a GQ such that any integer in number field, once again, an integer in number field is when I write A plus IB, I can take A, B to be integers instead of rational numbers. Then it's an integer. Similarly, A plus root 2B, A and B integers. So that's what you mean by integers in number field. And then he proved that there is a GQ which is independent of the number field, such that any number in K, which is a sum of cube powers, is a sum of GQ cube powers. What happens in the case of number fields is there are some numbers which cannot be written as a sum of GQ cube powers. You simply cannot do that. You cannot write it as a sum of any number of cube powers. You cannot do that in a number field. For instance, if you look at root 2, you cannot write it as root 2 is a bad example. Sorry. Anyway, there are numbers which cannot be written as sum of cube powers. That is true. But the moment you can write the sum of cube powers in some way, then you can do it already in GQ cube powers. That's the theorem of Ramanujan. This is as a result which I defied the attacks of the great Ziegel. Ziegel was, I told you, was one of the greatest mathematicians of the 20th century, and that guy was trying to prove it, but this guy beat him to it. Ramanujan beat him to it. So you see the caliber of the mind, and it's entirely reasonable that he should hope to become a Hilbert. So it's not. There was a major contribution. There was a major contribution to the varying problem from TIFR at a later point. This was much later, but since I talked about varying problem, I might as well do it now because I don't have to recall all these definitions later. R. Balasubramaniam was the person who did it. He joined the Tata Institute in 1972 and wrote his thesis with Ramachandra. That first piece of research was the resolution of a conjecture of a famous mathematician, Titchmarsh. That meant immediately we had great expectations of the man, and he lived up to it. He kept proving beautiful theorems. And the most impressive of his achievements was the determination of G4. I told you, every G4 is the number of numbers you need to have a sum of fourth powers. So he showed that G4 is 19. 19 is G4. That is every whole number, purely in Q. Every integer can be written as 19, sum of 19 fourth powers. That is Balasubramanian's theorem. Actually, the varying problem seems to have had some kind of what's the word I want? Affinity to Indians. There's a mathematician named S.S. Pillai, whose name is not well known, but he was actually a great Indian mathematician, I should say. He had determined GK for every K greater than equal to 6 by 1949. And in 1950, he was invited to the International Congress of Mathematicians to give a talk and died on the way in an air crash. Anyway, Pillai had proved this, and then G3 and G5 were also determined soon after. G4 seemed to be a difficult nut to crack, and finally Balasubramanian, in collaboration with two Frenchmen, proved that G4 is 19. Okay, that I'm actually jumping chronologically, but I'll go back now. Say, Chandrasekharan became a member of the executive committee of the IMU in 1950. Even before that, this mathematician Marshall Stone, I mentioned, he had started, there was an earlier international mathematical union, which got into problems because the conflict between the French and German mathematicians. The war separated them, and already the First World War, there was a lot of conflict, and so the organization was kind of deteriorating. And Marshall Stone stepped in and tried to revive it, and got new statutes and everything written. And in that, he took Chandrasekhar into the committee to form that. And he obviously had impressed Marshall Stone for things other than mathematics, as with Baba, for instance. He was to serve on that committee for some 25 years on the executive committee. Every 4 years, they elect a new one. This guy got elected every day. And 6 years, he spent as secretary, and 4 years as president of the International Mathematical Union. So that is the association with the International Mathematical Union. So long as Chandrasekhar was there. But after he left, he saw to it that some of his younger colleagues got in there, and it has been continuing. Right now, as I said, Ramdas, who was used to be here, is a member of the executive committee. Early on, in his first stint as a member of the EC, he got IMU to co-sponsor the TIFR, an international meeting every 4 years in TIFR, and he named it the International Colloquium in Mathematics. Every 4 years, the first colloquium was held in 1956, and already had some very distinguished speakers. In fact, the talk given in this colloquia, in the proceedings, you find some of the, what's the word I want, seminal papers in different areas of mathematics. The first was held in 1956, not unsurprisingly, Casey was the only speaker from India at that time. The international colloquia have since been held every 4 years, with just one break caused by the untimely death of a TIFR member. That was V.K. Patodi. Well, as you see, I'm in 1956 here. I had demanded 9 minutes extra time. If you give me that, I'll be happy. Okay. Okay. I'll try to rush through for the press. I mean, in fact, the rest of it, if I go on, it will only be something about somebody proved this, somebody proved that, etc. Okay, and some names will emerge. Okay, the colloquia regarded as highly prestigious. The organization is the responsibility committee headed by the dean, mathematics faculty. The mathematics faculty decides on what subject the colloquium should be held, and usually what they do is to see what exciting things are happening in mathematics, and then choose one in which there is some significant contribution from TIFR. And fortunately, we have been able to, the School of Mathematics has been able to do that continuously right till now. Okay. Yeah, the 60s emerged as a major international center in diverse areas of mathematics. I've already, Nasman and Seshadri, I had mentioned their work, who have made it a hub for algebraic geometry. Differential geometry is another area in which TIFR rose to eminence, thanks to a joint paper titled Universal Connections by M.S. Narasimhan and S. Ramanan. This work is the trigger behind the so-called Chern-Simons invariant, about which I think Spetavadia said something about it. Chern-Simons theory, what is it? The mathematical theory behind Chern-Simons theory is this work of Narasimhan and Ramanan. It has not been adequately acknowledged. Chern has, in private conversations, said that he got the idea from this paper, but it's not put down anywhere in literature. But clearly, it's I know this paper very well. It's a wonderful paper, and it's a kind of landmark paper in differential geometry. Ramachandra, who joined the TIFR as a student at a somewhat advanced stage, specialized in number theory of a somewhat different kind from that of Ramanujan. See, Casey had some general philosophy about the graduate school. All the students in the first year will have to be exposed to certain basic courses. It's compulsory for everyone. But Ramchandra was exempted from that. Casey saw that he was a very different kind of person, and this kind of discipline will probably not help him. So he said, we leave him alone. And he was left alone. He was not subjected to the first year courses. That is Ramchandra. Of course, the picture was taken when he was pretty old. And he wrote a paper titled On the Chronicus Limit Formula, appearing in the prestigious Annals of Mathematics, which has had a big impact in number theory over the years. It's still very alive paper, so to speak. Okay, at the risk of sounding immodest, which I suppose I am, I must mention my own work in discrete subgroups of D groups. This is the area of D groups in general. It's an important milestone in the second half of the 60s, which contributed to strengthening TIFR's position in the international arena. Further work I did in this area, some of it in collaboration with Gopal Prasad during the 70s and 80s, served to place TIFR in the forefront of this area. In the latter half of the 60s, C.P. Ramanujam turned to the study of topology of affine varieties. Earlier, he was working in number theory. He started on this. His research on the topological characterization of the affine plane was the beginning of the in-depth study of the topology of affine surfaces all over the world. Whoever was studying this paper had to be the foundation. R.B. Gurjar of TIFR was among the leaders in the subject in the 80s. Some of Gurjar's work was done in collaboration with Anand Shastri, also at TIFR. Important results were obtained by Paman Murthy in commutative algebra, which is essentially affine algebraic geometry. This was also done in the 60s, and he continued to do it in the 70s, but mid-70s he left the Tata Institute. So, Paman Murthy was a very interesting character, but I cannot go into stories about him the time I have. Many younger people inspired by Seshadri and Narasimhan took to the study of algebraic geometry, in particular modular problems. The leading figure among them was Ramanan. In the 70s, there were more adherents. At the end of each decade, there was a school. At the end of the decade, there was a school in the area, in the sense that a good number of the group. Many significant contributions came from Ramanan and Ramanathan. Even as TIFR was performing at a superior level in the areas where it had established itself, in the late 70s, yet another area came into the ambit of the school. S.G. Dani embarked on research in homogeneous dynamics and established himself as a leader in the field by the end of the 70s. In the 80s, sorry, a mistake. In the 70s, too came work further work in affine algebraic geometry. Parimala created a stir by giving a counterexample to what is known as the quadratic state conjecture, and I followed this up with a comprehensive treatment of the question. The big story of the 70s is a tragic story of Patodi. Patodi joined TIFR in 1967 as a student. His teachers recognized him exceptional talent, and yet were pleasantly surprised when he came up with a manuscript proving a conjecture of McKean and Singer. I mean, he was not very sociable, so he was not moving around, he was not talking to people in a big way, but quietly he was reading a paper and working on it and proves the theorem. And this is around 1970 or so. 67 is a student, 70 he comes up with a paper proving the conjecture, which many others would have been very happy to prove. This was just the beginning of a series of papers that culminated in a new proof of the celebrated Atiyah-Singer theorem in collaboration with Atiyah and Watt. The stature of the collaborators notwithstanding, Patodi's was the key role in this joint work. You know, in mathematics, the authors' names are written in alphabetical order, unlike in physics where you first named author has greater importance on. That doesn't happen in mathematics. And as you can see, Patodi's name would have been the last, but in a physics situation, probably his name would have been the first. Tragically, Patodi died in 1976 at the tender age of 33 at the height of his powers. And that is the reason the 78 No, there's a colloquium supposed to be, interact colloquium supposed to be held around that time. It was supposed to be in his area, so it was cancelled. The pride of place in the research done in the 70s goes, in my view, to Madhav Nori's work on fundamental group schemes. It's a work in algebraic geometry. It's a theory rather than a solution of a specific problem. There are two kinds of mathematicians: those who solve problems and those who develop theories. And those who develop theories think their theories will automatically solve the problem. So that's why they develop theories. So most mathematicians at the Tata Institute have been problem solvers. Madhav Nori has done something towards building a theory, but it's not such a big theory eventually, but it's a theory, all right. And it did solve some problems. He left TIFR in the 90s, a really serious loss for us. Other people have left, but this man's going was much more of a serious loss because everybody was talking mathematics to him. And anytime you talk to him, you feel you get a new insight. That's the kind of thing. I have personal experience of that guy coming and asking me some questions in topology because I was considered the local expert in topology at that time. And then I end up finding that he has more interesting things to say than I have to him. So, despite that loss, TIFR has continued to produce research of very high caliber. One piece of superb research that caught the limelight was the exploitation of the concept of Frobenius splitting by Vikram Mehta and A. Ramanathan. This was in the 1980s. I must mention Shravan Kumar. He has done things in diverse areas, but the resolution of the so-called PRV conjecture is one of the outstanding pieces of research to come out of TIFR. This PRV conjecture is a conjecture by three Indian mathematicians, Parthasarathy, Rangarao, Varadarajan, and the Westerners find it too difficult to make all those three names, so it's called PRV conjecture. The conjecture was made in 1962, something like that. This guy proved it in the 80s. He too left TIFR in the 90s, so he has done interesting work, but I'm not going to not work in TIFR, so I will not talk about it. The 90s saw the academic leadership pass on to younger people from those who had joined TIFR. I mean, in the 90s, I was still floating around as Eminence Greece, if you like. And so I was still looked up to as the tradition in this country is, so age matters a lot. But then towards the end of the century, I was retiring, doing things other than mathematics. So younger people had a chance to come to the fore. Dani was there, and later new leaders were Deependra Prasad, Srinivas, and T. N. Venkatramana. Deependra Prasad left the TIFR just 2 years ago, or a year ago or something. Srinivas and Venkatramana is due to retire in February, and Srinivas later in June or July, something like that. And these three good guys are as good mathematicians as any that the school have had. They don't have the same kind of image some of us in the earlier generation had, partly because mathematics has become different. In the sense that, in the old days, I worked in league groups, but people working in topology, working in algebraic geometry would know my name because everybody kept track of everything that's happening. That is no longer possible. The fields have become so vast individually. So if you ask someone outside algebraic geometry about Srinivas, they may not know. In the old days, it was not like this. So we had therefore a bigger image in some sense. These guys are just as good as we were, but they don't get that image. It's unfortunate, but I suppose it is the way things have developed. There's nothing you can do about it. Deependra Prasad, for instance, he works in automorphic forms, and he made a conjecture in his thesis on which there were at least two conferences in the recent past. The conferences are devoted to the Prasad's conjecture, actually called Gross Prasad conjecture, because two people were involved. Gross Prasad conjecture is something which he made essentially as a graduate student. And that there are two seminars in the recent past on that subject. It's not a resolved conjecture. Srinivas is an expert in algebraic geometry, but not the kind which Nathaman and Seshadri initiated here, somewhat different, and he has done excellent work there. And he wrote a book on K theory, which has received much adulation. I know what's the word, but I'm not getting it. Maybe the word is there. Yeah, Srinivas' book has received many accolades, has been received with accolades. In fact, it was published by Birkhauser, and a leading mathematician by name Serre was very annoyed with Birkhauser's bringing out of the book. He wrote to them saying that it's such a good book and you have done such a bad job. So, so goes the story. Okay, Dipendra Prasad works in number theory. A conjecture he made early in his career has been made the subject of several conferences in the recent past. Venkatramana was my student and has been the main person keeping activity in my area alive and kicking in TIFR. He has done very nice work. There are other younger people performing at a high level and maintaining and reinforcing the standing achieved by the School of Mathematics in the 60s. But I have only a faint acquaintance with some of their work. My apologies to them for not saying anything about their work. I think I'll stop with that. Thank you for.